All right, ready to dive into mindfulness and meditation.
Absolutely. Let's get started.
This time we're going deeper into the science, yeah?
Yeah.
Past the feel-good stuff to see how these practices actually impact, like, your brain.
And your everyday life too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got research here from, like, Nature Reviews Neuroscience.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the big leagues. This deep dives like a crash course in the neuroscience behind it all.
Like looking under the hood, huh?
Yeah, like the intricate workings, how mindfulness can actually fine-tune things.
For optimal performance, right?
So to start, what even is meditation?
Well, there are, a bunch of different types. Some like use mantras or sounds. Others are more movement-based, like yoga or tai chi.
Right, right.
But the one that neuroscientists are most interested in is mindfulness meditation.
That's the one where you try to like be present.
Right.
Notice
Well,
your thoughts and feelings, but not judge them.
exactly. It's about cultivating this non-reactive awareness, like both internally and of the world around you.
Yeah, okay. Seems simple, but I bet the research is complicated.
It is. Mindfulness research is pretty new, and there are some inherent challenges. One is the difference between cross-sectional and longitudinal studies.
Can you break that down? Why is the type of study so important?
Well, think of a cross-sectional study like a snapshot, right?
Okay.
You compare, say, a group of meditators to a control group at one specific time. You can get some interesting data, but you can't really tell what's cause and effect.
I see.
Like, it could be that people who are drawn to meditation already have different brain structures, and that's why they find it helpful.
So you need more like a time lapse then. That's what longitudinal studies are.
Precisely. You follow people over time and see how things actually change. It's much better at figuring out cause and effect.
Gotcha.
But even those have limitations. They're expensive and tough to keep up for long periods.
Right. The classic research struggle.
Yeah. And then there's another layer, novice versus expert meditators. The brain areas used when you first learn to meditate might be different from the ones used when you've been doing it for years.
So a newbie's using different like mental muscles than a pro.
That's the idea. And obviously, like any good science, you need strong control groups and interventions to isolate the effects of mindfulness.
Makes sense. Make sure the changes you see are actually because of mindfulness.
Exactly.
Okay, so challenges aside, what does the research say about meditation's impact on the brain? I've heard it can actually like change its structure. Is that right?
It is. Lots of studies using things like MRI have found changes in both gray matter and white matter after mindfulness meditation.
Wow.
It's almost like working out your brain, strengthening key areas.
So it's not a metaphor. You're actually reshaping the brain. Like what kind of changes?
Well, one meta-analysis found consistent changes in 8 brain regions. For example, they saw thicker cortex.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the outer layer of the brain, in areas related to body awareness, and a bigger hippocampus, too.
Right, which is,
Crucial for memory.
okay, so mindfulness could actually make my memory better, like literally strengthening my hippocampus.
Exactly. And here's where things get even more interesting. Research suggests mindfulness works by boosting, like, 3 core abilities: attention control, emotion regulation, and self-awareness. Each of those is linked to specific changes in the brain.
Let's break down these pillars of mindfulness, starting with attention control, because, oh man, do I struggle with that.
I think a lot of people do.
My mind's like always racing. Does mindfulness really help you focus?
It really can. Studies show even just a few days of practice leads to better conflict monitoring. It's the ability to focus even with distractions around.
So I could actually get better at like tuning out those distractions and staying on task.
Yeah. A big part of that is the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC.
ECC.
Right. Think of it as your brain's air traffic control center.
Okay, what does it actually do?
Well, it helps you manage information, decide what to focus on, what to ignore. And research shows it gets more active and undergoes structural changes after mindfulness training.
That's wild. So mindfulness is like upgrading my brain's air traffic control.
It kind of is.
Okay, what about emotion regulation? I definitely get carried away by my emotions sometimes, especially stress and anxiety. Can mindfulness actually help manage those feelings better?
It can. Remember, mindfulness isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about skillfully managing them. Research suggests it strengthens the prefrontal cortex.
Right, the brain's like executive center.
Exactly. It allows it to better regulate the amygdala, the emotional hub.
So instead of getting swept away by my emotions, mindfulness could help me like respond in a more balanced way.
Yeah. It's like building a stronger bridge between the thinking part of your brain and the feeling part so they can communicate more effectively.
Hmm, that's interesting.
And what's really cool is that your level of expertise matters here.
How so?
Well, beginners tend to show increased prefrontal activity during meditation, like they're working hard to control their emotions. But experienced meditators show decreased activity.
Huh. That seems counterintuitive. Why would it go down with experience?
It suggests they've achieved this state of effortless acceptance. They don't have to fight their emotions anymore because they've learned to observe them without judgment, ride the waves.
So it's not about eliminating emotions, but changing how we relate to them.
Exactly. That's a really important distinction. And it shows how mindfulness can help you become more emotionally resilient.
Okay, last pillar.
Uh-huh.
Self-awareness. That's a buzzword you hear all the time. But how does mindfulness actually affect our sense of self?
It lets you step outside your usual self-narrative, experience the world with fresh eyes.
I like that.
You become more aware of your thoughts, feelings, and sensations without getting caught up in them.
So instead of getting lost in thought or worrying, I can, observe them, but with detachment.
Exactly. Brain imaging studies show interesting changes in the default mode network, or DMN, in meditators.
Nate, what's the default mode network?
It's a network of brain areas that's active when your mind is wandering, lost in thought, dwelling on the past or future. It's basically your brain on autopilot.
Okay.
And in meditators, the DMN shows changes in activity and connectivity.
What kind of changes?
A shift away from self-centered rumination toward more present moment awareness. It's like mindfulness quiets the chatter of the DMN and creates a clearer, more spacious sense of self.
So it's not just about calming the mind. It's actually
Yeah.
changing how my brain works on a fundamental level. This is really deep stuff.
It is. And the insula, a region involved in body awareness and the experience of self, that also shows more activity and structural changes after mindfulness training.
Body awareness, that makes sense. When I've tried meditation, I definitely notice my physical sensations more. Like my breath, my posture, even tiny feelings I'd normally ignore.
Exactly. That heightened awareness can help you feel more grounded, more connected to yourself, deepens your understanding of your own inner world.
This is also fascinating. So the research is saying mindfulness strengthens these key mental muscles: attention, emotion regulation, self-awareness, and those stronger muscles then have this ripple effect in our everyday lives, helping us manage stress better, make better decisions, and just feel better overall.
It's a great way to put it. Mindfulness is about training the mind, just like we train our bodies at the gym. And those trained mental muscles allow us to handle life's challenges with more skill and resilience.
I'm definitely starting to see the science behind it, but I gotta wonder, if it's so beneficial, why isn't everybody doing it? What are some of the barriers that keep people from embracing these practices?
That's a good question. There are a few common hurdles. One is it takes effort and commitment. Mindfulness is like learning any new skill. It takes practice and dedication. And in our fast-paced world, finding the time and space to practice regularly can be tough.
Yeah, I feel that. It's easy to get caught up in everything else and put our well-being last.
It is. And sometimes there's this misconception that mindfulness is about emptying your mind, achieving this blissful state of, nothingness.
Right, like you have to become a monk or something.
Exactly. But in reality, it's about paying attention to what's happening right now, whether it's pleasant or not. And especially when you're starting out, your mind might resist that. It's used to jumping from thought to thought, and bringing it back to the present moment can feel like a struggle.
So it's normal to experience that initial resistance. And the key is to just keep practicing, keep bringing our attention back to the breath or whatever we're focusing on.
Exactly. It's about cultivating patience and persistence. The more you practice, the better you get at observing your thoughts without getting swept away by them. And over time, you'll find your mind naturally settles into a state of stillness and clarity.
That's encouraging. It sounds like mindfulness is more about developing a new relationship with our thoughts and emotions rather than trying to control them or force them into submission.
Exactly. It's a shift in perspective, a way of approaching our inner experience with more curiosity and acceptance. And as we cultivate this new way of being, we see those benefits ripple out into all areas of our lives.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm definitely feeling inspired to dive deeper into mindfulness. But before we go there, I'm curious to hear about the research landscape. You mentioned some of the challenges earlier, but what are some of the most exciting, breakthroughs or developments happening in the field right now?
Well, there's so much exciting work going on. One area that's really buzzing is the exploration of individual differences in how people respond to mindfulness training.
Individual differences. Like what kind of factors are we talking about?
Things like personality traits, genetics, even life experiences, all of that can affect how our brains respond to mindfulness. For example, some people might find certain techniques more effective than others, and the pace at which they see benefits could vary too.
Interesting.
Yeah, researchers are trying to understand these individual differences so they can personalize mindfulness training, right? They
Exactly.
make it more accessible and effective for everyone.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. The research is moving towards a more like tailored, personalized approach.
Exactly. And another really fascinating area is exploring how mindfulness can help with specific mental health conditions.
Like um, anxiety, depression, addiction.
Yes. Those are all areas where mindfulness-based interventions have shown some really promising results. Researchers are investigating how mindfulness can actually rewire the brain's circuitry, reducing reactivity to stress and promoting emotional regulation.
Right.
And there's growing evidence that mindfulness can help with cognitive function too, like attention, focus, memory, all of that.
Wow, this is all so exciting. It sounds like mindfulness research is really gaining momentum, and we're just like scratching the surface of its potential.
You're absolutely right. And as we keep unraveling the mysteries of the mind and the mechanisms behind mindfulness, we're likely to see even more innovative applications and profound benefits emerge in the years to come.
I can't wait to see where it all leads. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how mindfulness shows up in our everyday lives. We've talked about brain changes, but how do those changes translate into, like, real-world benefits?
Well, let's start with relationships. You see, when we cultivate greater self-awareness and emotional regulation, we become more in tune with our own needs and emotions. And that, in turn, allows us to show up more fully and authentically in our interactions with others.
So by understanding ourselves better, we can connect with others on a deeper level.
Exactly. Mindfulness also helps us develop greater empathy and compassion. As we practice observing our own thoughts and feelings without judgment, we get better at extending that same awareness to others. And that can lead to more harmonious and fulfilling relationships, both personal and professional.
It makes sense. It's like we're building those muscles of understanding and compassion, which then allows us to handle social interactions with more grace.
Yes, and it also helps us manage conflict more effectively. When we're triggered or upset, mindfulness gives us that ability to pause, step back, and choose a more skillful response, rather than just reacting impulsively.
So instead of getting caught up in the heat of the moment, we can create a space between like stimulus and response.
Exactly. That space, that pause is where our freedom lies. It's where we can access our wisdom and choose a course of action that aligns with our values and intentions.
I'm starting to see how mindfulness can be really transformative, not just in our own inner experience, but in how we relate to the world around us.
It's a profound shift in perspective, a way of seeing the world and ourselves with more clarity, kindness, and compassion. And that shift can have ripple effects that go way beyond our individual lives.
This is also fascinating. But we've only just begun to explore this topic. There's so much more to unpack.
Absolutely. We've laid a good foundation, but there's so much more to uncover. We haven't even touched on the specific techniques and practices that people can use to cultivate mindfulness in their everyday lives.
That's true. And I'm also curious about, like, the challenges or obstacles that people might face when they start this mindfulness journey.
Those are great questions. We'll be diving into those in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. But before we go there, I want to leave you with something to think about. If mindfulness can really rewire our brains and transform our experience of the world, what does that mean for society as a whole? That's a big question. What if mindfulness was as normal as exercise? Could it lead to a more peaceful, more compassionate, maybe even a smarter society?
Okay, now I'm even more interested. But first, I want to know about the how. What are the actual mechanisms at work when we practice mindfulness? How does it change our, like, brain chemistry and how our brains work?
Well, let's start with neuroplasticity. That's the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout our lives.
Right.
And mindfulness seems to be a really powerful stimulator of neuroplasticity. Essentially, it rewires the brain for the better.
So it's like mindfulness is a workout for the brain, forging new connections and pathways.
Exactly. When we engage in these practices, we're strengthening existing neural networks and even even creating new ones, particularly in areas related to attention, emotion regulation, self-awareness.
Right.
And another key mechanism involves stress reduction. We know chronic stress is really toxic to the brain. It leads to inflammation, even cell death.
Wow.
But mindfulness, with its focus on present moment awareness and acceptance, it helps buffer against those harmful effects.
So it's like giving our brains a break from the constant stress hormones.
Exactly. And that reduction in stress then leads to a whole cascade of positive changes. Improved mood, better sleep, enhanced cognitive function, even a stronger immune system.
It's amazing how everything is like interconnected. Mindfulness reduces stress, which promotes neuroplasticity, which leads to those positive changes in attention, emotion regulation, self-awareness. It's like a virtuous cycle.
It really is. And it's important to remember that these mechanisms are probably intertwined, working together to create those beneficial effects.
It's a complex interplay, but the science seems pretty clear. Mindfulness works. So are there any specific techniques or practices that have been shown to be particularly effective?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, mindfulness meditation is one of the most well-researched and widely practiced techniques. It involves intentionally focusing your attention on the present moment, usually using, the breath, body sensations, or even thoughts and emotions as anchors for your awareness.
And the research shows that this type of meditation can actually improve attention, emotion regulation, self-awareness. It's not just like a subjective feeling. There's actual evidence to back it up.
Exactly. We're seeing corresponding changes in the brain regions associated with those abilities. It's not wishful thinking. It's based on solid scientific evidence.
Okay, so mindfulness meditation is a great place to start. But are there other techniques besides, like sitting meditation?
Absolutely. Yoga and Tai Chi, which combine movement with focused awareness, have also been shown to have positive effects on the brain and body.
Right.
And there's a growing interest in loving kindness meditation, which involves cultivating feelings of compassion and goodwill towards oneself and others.
Loving kindness meditation, I've heard of that. What kind of brain changes are they seeing with that practice?
It's still a relatively new area of research, but some studies suggest that loving kindness meditation can increase activity in brain regions associated with empathy, social connection, positive emotions.
So you're essentially training your brain to be more compassionate, more connected to others.
It's a fascinating possibility, and it highlights how much potential the mind has to shape our experiences and maybe even influence the world around us.
I love it. It's empowering to think that we can cultivate these positive qualities in ourselves.
It is. It challenges this idea that we're, just at the mercy of our genes or our circumstances. We have agency, the ability to shape our brains, shape our lives through practices like mindfulness.
That's such a powerful message. But I have to admit, I'm still a little skeptical. If mindfulness is so great, why isn't everybody doing it?
Well, for one, it takes effort, commitment. Like any worthwhile skill, mindfulness takes practice, takes dedication. And in our, fast-paced, always-on culture, it can be hard to make time for these practices.
Yeah, I get it. It's so easy to get swept up in the busyness of life and just, prioritize everything else above our own well-being.
Exactly. And sometimes the idea that mindfulness is about achieving some blissful state of emptiness, that can be a barrier too.
Right, like you have to become a monk and meditate for hours on end to see any benefit.
That's definitely not the case. Remember, mindfulness is about paying attention to what's happening in the present moment without judgment, and you can do that in just a few minutes every day.
Oh, okay.
It's about integrating mindfulness into your life, not escaping from it.
I'm realizing mindfulness is more nuanced and complex than I thought. It's not a quick fix, not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's a journey.
You're exactly right. And the research is always evolving, providing new insights, new applications. We're learning more and more all the time about the mechanisms and the potential of these practices.
I'm excited to see where the research leads. But I'm also curious about the open questions, the things researchers are still trying to figure out. What are some of the mysteries that remain in mindfulness research?
Well, one really active area is exploring individual differences in response to mindfulness training. We talked about that a bit earlier, but there's still so much to learn about why some people benefit more from certain techniques or how things like personality and genetics influence the effectiveness of mindfulness.
So while the overall evidence is compelling, there's still a lot of variation in how people respond.
Yeah. And understanding those individual differences is crucial for developing personalized approaches to mindfulness training. create programs that are tailored to each person's needs to maximize their potential for growth and well-being.
A personalized approach could definitely make mindfulness more accessible and more effective for everyone. And what about clinical applications?
That's another incredibly exciting area. We're seeing so many studies investigating mindfulness-based interventions for all sorts of mental and physical health conditions.
Like the ones you mentioned before: anxiety, depression, addiction.
Yeah, and even chronic pain, heart disease, cancer. Researchers are exploring how mindfulness can help regulate emotions, reduce stress, improve sleep, boost the immune system.
Right.
And what's really promising is that mindfulness isn't just a complementary therapy anymore. It's being integrated into mainstream healthcare settings.
That's great to hear. It seems like mindfulness has the potential to, revolutionize how we approach health and well-being.
It's a paradigm shift, moving away from a purely disease-focused model to one that emphasizes prevention and cultivates resilience.
I like that.
And we're seeing mindfulness being used in education, workplaces, even the criminal justice system.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
What are some specific examples of how mindfulness is being applied in those settings?
Well, in schools, mindfulness programs are helping students, improve their attention, their focus, their emotional regulation.
Right.
And the skills not only help with academic performance, but also they promote social emotional learning, reduce bullying.
So mindfulness is beneficial not just for the individual student, but for the whole school environment.
Absolutely. And in workplaces, mindfulness training is being used to help employees manage stress, improve communication, boost creativity, enhance productivity. And there's even evidence that mindfulness can encourage ethical decision-making, reduce workplace conflict.
I can definitely see how mindfulness would be valuable in the workplace. It's fascinating to see how these ancient practices are finding their place in our modern world.
It speaks to their timeless wisdom and their relevance to the human experience.
Right.
And even in the criminal justice system, mindfulness is being used to help inmates rehabilitate, reduce recidivism, and cultivate empathy and compassion.
It sounds like mindfulness is becoming a real force for positive change across many different parts of society.
It is. While it's not a cure-all for all of society's problems, it's definitely a powerful tool for personal and collective transformation.
You've given us a lot to think about. It's incredible to consider the ripple effects of mindfulness, how it goes beyond the individual and impacts our communities, the world at large. But before we dive into those broader implications, I want to shift back to the individual experience. You mentioned that there are specific techniques and practices people can use to cultivate mindfulness in their daily lives. Can you talk more about that? What are some practical tools that our listeners can start using in their routines?
Absolutely. One of the most accessible and foundational practices is, of course, mindfulness meditation.
Right.
As we discussed, it involves intentionally focusing your attention on the present moment, usually using the breath, body sensations, or even thoughts and emotions as anchors.
Right.
There are tons of guided meditations available online through apps, which makes it really easy to get started. And you don't need to spend hours meditating to see benefits. Even just a few minutes a day can make a difference.
That's good to know. It feels less daunting when you think of it as a gradual process rather than an all or nothing kind of thing.
Exactly. And another powerful technique is mindful breathing. It's as simple as bringing your attention to your breath, noticing the sensation of each inhale and each exhale.
Okay.
You can do this anytime, anywhere, while sitting at your desk, walking down the street, even waiting in line. It's a really quick and easy way to ground yourself in the present moment and interrupt those streams of thoughts that often pull us away from our experience.
That's a great tip. I can definitely see myself incorporating that into my day. Are there other simple practices our listeners can try?
Absolutely. Mindful walking is another great one. Instead of rushing through your day on autopilot, try slowing down, paying attention to the sensations of your feet on the ground, the movement of your body, the sights, sounds, and smells around you. It's a beautiful way to bring mindfulness into everyday activities and cultivate a deeper appreciation for the present moment.
I love that. It's like turning a mundane task into an opportunity for mindfulness.
Yeah.
What other practices would you recommend?
Well, mindful eating is a great way to reconnect with your body and cultivate gratitude for the nourishment you receive.
Right.
Instead of mindlessly eating your food, try slowing down, savoring each bite, paying attention to the textures, flavors, aromas.
Yeah.
It's a really nice way to bring mindfulness into a daily ritual and make it a more mindful experience.
These are all great suggestions. I'm feeling inspired to start using these practices myself. But I also wonder, are there any common challenges or obstacles that people might face when they begin their mindfulness journey?
That's a great question. One common obstacle is simply resistance.
Hmm.
Our minds are wired to wander, and it's totally natural to experience distractions, restlessness, even boredom when we first start practicing mindfulness.
Like you said before, our minds are used to being in constant motion, and stillness can feel uncomfortable, maybe even like a little scary.
Exactly. And another common challenge is self-judgment. We might get frustrated with ourselves when our minds wander, or we might compare ourselves to others who seem to be better at meditating.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap of self-criticism, especially when we're learning something new. What advice would you give to someone who's struggling with those challenges?
Well, the most important thing is to cultivate self-compassion. Remember that mindfulness is a journey, not a destination, and it's okay to be exactly where you are.
I like that.
Notice those self-critical thoughts without judgment, and gently bring your attention back to your chosen anchor, your breath, your body, whatever you're focusing on. And remember, consistency is more important than perfection. Even a few minutes of practice each day can make a big difference over time.
That's reassuring. It takes the pressure off and makes it feel more approachable.
Exactly. And if you're finding it really tough, don't be afraid to seek guidance from a qualified mindfulness teacher or join a meditation group. There's a whole community of support out there for people who are interested in exploring these practices.
That's good to know. It helps to know there are resources available. But I'm wondering, aside from those common challenges, are there any potential, risks or downsides to mindfulness that people should be aware of?
That's a really important question. While mindfulness is generally considered safe and beneficial, there are a few things to keep in mind. For some people, especially those with a history of trauma or mental health conditions, certain mindfulness practices might trigger difficult emotions or memories.
Right, like mindfulness could bring up things that they've been suppressing or avoiding, and that could be overwhelming or even destabilizing.
Exactly. And it's also important to approach mindfulness with a balanced perspective. It's not a cure-all, and it shouldn't be used as a replacement for professional medical or mental health treatment. If you're experiencing serious emotional distress or mental health challenges, it's crucial to seek help from a qualified professional.
That's a crucial point. It's important to use mindfulness as a complement to other forms of care, not as a replacement.
Yes. And it's also important to be careful when choosing mindfulness teachers or programs.
Hmm.
There's unfortunately a growing industry around mindfulness, and not all teachers or programs are created equal. Do your research, find qualified and experienced teachers, and choose programs that align with your values and goals.
That's good advice. It's always wise to be cautious and informed when exploring any new field or practice.
Absolutely. And while there are potential risks and challenges with mindfulness, it's important to remember that the vast majority of research shows that it has significant benefits for physical, mental, and emotional well-being.
Okay, so we've covered a lot: the science, the benefits, the challenges, and some practical tips. But I'm curious about the long-term effects of mindfulness.
Yeah.
We've talked about how it impacts the brain, impacts our daily lives. But what happens when we practice consistently over time? Does it keep reshaping our brains? Does it keep influencing our experiences?
That's a great question, and it's something that researchers are still actively studying. But the emerging evidence suggests that the benefits of mindfulness don't just stay the same, they might actually deepen and expand over time.
So it's not about reaching a certain level and then plateauing, but rather an ongoing process of growth and transformation.
Exactly. Think of it like physical exercise. The more you train your muscles, the stronger they get, the more resilient they become. Similarly, with mindfulness, the more we practice, the more we cultivate those mental muscles of attention, emotion regulation, self-awareness. And as these qualities become more ingrained in us, they start to affect every aspect of our lives, how we think, feel, behave, and how we relate to the world around us.
That's a beautiful image. It suggests that mindfulness is not a temporary fix, but a path to lasting change.
It is. And the long-term effects of mindfulness go beyond the individual. As more people embrace these practices, we have the potential to create a ripple effect of positive change throughout society.
That's a powerful thought. It brings us back to that question you asked earlier about the implications of widespread mindfulness. If we can really cultivate greater attention, compassion, and wisdom, what kind of impact could that have on our communities, on the world?
The possibilities are endless. Imagine a world where mindfulness is a part of every aspect of life, from education to healthcare to politics to business. A world where people are more present, more compassionate, more connected to themselves, each other, and the planet.
It sounds utopian, but is it really possible? Can we really create such a profound shift?
It's a bold goal, and it definitely won't happen overnight. but I do believe it's possible. The power of mindfulness is in its simplicity, its accessibility. It's a practice that anyone can do, regardless of their background, their beliefs, their circumstances.
It's empowering to think that we all have the capacity to cultivate these qualities and contribute to a more mindful world. But I also know that there are, systemic issues, societal structures that can get in the way.
You're absolutely right. We can't ignore the systems that contribute to stress, inequality, suffering. But mindfulness can be a powerful tool for addressing those challenges too.
Oh,
By developing greater awareness and compassion, we can become more attuned to the injustices, the systems of oppression that create suffering, and then we can work together to create a more just, equitable world.
so mindfulness isn't just about personal transformation. It can also be a catalyst for social change.
Exactly. Mindfulness empowers us to see the world more clearly, with more compassion, and to respond to its challenges with wisdom and skill. It can help us break free from limiting beliefs, from harmful patterns, and create a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world for ourselves and for future generations.
That's an inspiring message. It speaks to the potential of mindfulness to change not just our own lives, but the course of history.
It's a profound realization that within each of us we have the power to create a better world, starting with our own minds and hearts.
I'm feeling a sense of awe and responsibility. Awe at the power of the mind, and a responsibility to cultivate these practices both for myself and for others.
That's a beautiful sentiment. It echoes the heart of mindfulness, a journey of self-discovery and transformation that extends outward, touching everyone around us.
This has been incredible. We've delved into the world of mindfulness, uncovering the science, the transformative potential, the implications for individuals, communities, and the world. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned, that the benefits of mindfulness may deepen over time. What are some specific ways that long-term mindfulness practice might continue to change our brains and our experiences?
That's a really interesting question. One thing researchers are looking at is the impact of long-term mindfulness practice on the brain's default mode network, the DMN.
Right?
We talked about it earlier. It's that network of brain regions that's active when our minds are wandering, lost in thought, ruminating about the past or future.
Right. It's our brain on autopilot.
Exactly. Studies have shown that mindfulness can quiet the activity of the DMN, promoting greater present moment awareness, reducing mind wandering. But what's really interesting is that long-term meditators show even greater reductions in DMN activity, suggesting that those benefits, the improvements in attention and focus, might continue to grow over time.
So the more we practice mindfulness, the better we become at silencing those distractions and staying present.
Precisely. And these changes in the DMN are linked to improvements in emotional regulation and self-awareness too. As we get less caught up in our thoughts and more present to our experience, we can observe our emotions without judgment and respond to them in more skillful ways.
It's like mindfulness is training us to become more objective about our inner world, creating space between a stimulus and our response.
Exactly. And this ability to step back, to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment, that's a key part of emotional resilience. It helps us handle life's ups and downs with more balance and develop inner peace that isn't easily shaken by external circumstances.
That's a powerful skill, and it seems like something that would deepen naturally with consistent mindfulness practice.
It does. And another exciting area of research is looking at how long-term mindfulness practice impacts the brain's structure and function.
You mentioned earlier that mindfulness can lead to changes in the brain structure, like thickening of the cortex and a larger hippocampus. Do those changes keep going over time?
There's evidence to suggest that they might. Studies have shown that long-term meditators have more gray matter in areas associated with attention, emotion regulation, self-awareness, compared to non-meditators.
So it's not just a temporary change, it's a lasting transformation of the brain.
It seems that way. And these structural changes are linked to improvements in cognitive function, emotional well-being, even physical health.
That's incredible. It suggests mindfulness is more than just a surface-level practice. It's a powerful intervention that can literally reshape our brains and increase our capacity for well-being.
It is, and the implications of these findings are huge. If mindfulness can really improve our cognitive abilities, our emotional resilience, our physical health, imagine the potential for everyone, for communities, for the whole world.
It's a truly inspiring vision. But it's important to stay grounded, too. Mindfulness isn't a magical cure, and it's not a replacement for other forms of care or social action.
Absolutely. Mindfulness is a powerful tool, but just one tool. We need to be smart about it, use wisdom, and be committed to addressing the systemic issues that contribute to suffering.
That's an important point. It's about integrating mindfulness into a holistic approach to well-being, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
Exactly. And as we cultivate these practices, as we embody their wisdom, we can create a more just, compassionate, and thriving world for everyone, both now and in the future.
This has been such a rich exploration. I'm feeling really inspired to continue my own mindfulness journey and share these practices with others. But before we end this deep dive, I want to focus on one final topic: the relationship between mindfulness and spirituality. We've mostly focused on the science, but I feel like there's a deeper dimension to these practices, something beyond pure science.
That's a really insightful observation. And you're right, mindfulness has a history and implications that go beyond what science can fully explain. While science is great for understanding how mindfulness works and what benefits it has, it doesn't capture the full depth and richness of these practices.
Can you say more about that? What are some of those spiritual dimensions that science might miss?
Well, for one, mindfulness can cultivate this sense of interconnectedness, a feeling of being part of something bigger than yourself.
Right.
As we practice paying attention to the present moment, we become more aware of the web of relationships that connect us to everyone, to everything, to the natural world.
It's like mindfulness shifts our perspective from a sense of separation to a sense of unity and belonging.
Exactly. And this shift can have a big impact on our values, our ethics, our sense of purpose.
It seems like mindfulness can foster a more expansive and compassionate view of the world, one that recognizes the inherent worth and dignity of all beings.
It can. And mindfulness can also cultivate a sense of awe and wonder, an appreciation for the beauty and mystery of life. As we slow down, pay attention to the present moment, we start to notice the extraordinary in the ordinary. The patterns of a leaf, the colors of a sunset, the joy of a child's laughter.
It's like mindfulness helps us rediscover the magic and wonder that we often miss in our busy lives.
Precisely. And this sense of awe and wonder can be a source of deep joy, gratitude, and inspiration.
It's beautiful to think about. I'm also curious about the role of mindfulness in cultivating, spiritual qualities. Things like wisdom, compassion, equanimity.
Those are all qualities that naturally arise from consistent mindfulness practice. As we develop greater self-awareness, emotional regulation, we become less reactive to the ups and downs of life, more able to respond to challenges with wisdom and skill. And as we cultivate a sense of interconnectedness, our compassion for ourselves and others naturally grows.
It sounds like mindfulness isn't just about calming the mind, but also about awakening the heart.
It is. And this awakening of the heart is often described as a spiritual journey, a process of unfolding your true nature, realizing your interconnectedness with everything.
That's a beautiful and inspiring idea. It suggests that mindfulness isn't just a technique or a set of practices, but a pathway to a more meaningful life.
It is. And while science can shed light on how mindfulness works and the benefits it brings, ultimately, it's a journey that each of us has to take on our own.
This has been such an insightful exploration. I feel inspired to continue my own mindfulness practice and share it with others. But before we wrap up, I want to shift gears one more time and talk about flow. I've heard that mindfulness can help us experience flow states, those moments where we're completely absorbed and focused, effortlessly concentrated, in the zone, as they say. Is there a connection between mindfulness and flow?
That's a great question. And yeah, there's definitely a connection. Some researchers believe that mindfulness is actually a key ingredient for cultivating those flow states. Remember, mindfulness is about bringing your full attention to the present moment, without judgment, without distraction. And flow states have that same quality of attention, that complete absorption in what you're doing where you lose track of time and effort.
So by training our mind to be present and focused, mindfulness sets the stage for those effortless flow experiences.
Exactly. And mindfulness helps create the perfect environment for flow by reducing stress and anxiety, which can really interfere with our ability to concentrate and get fully engaged in an activity.
It's like mindfulness clears the mental clutter, creates space for flow to emerge.
Yes, and it also enhances self-awareness, which is crucial for recognizing when you're entering a flow state and for creating the conditions that support it.
That makes sense. If you're not aware of your internal state, you might miss the subtle signs that flow is starting.
Exactly. Mindfulness also helps you develop a growth mindset, which is so important for embracing challenges and pushing through difficulties, qualities that are essential for mastering any skill and for experiencing those peak performance moments that we often associate with flow.
So mindfulness isn't just about relaxation or stress reduction. It's also a path to unlocking our potential, to achieving a state of effortless mastery.
It is. By training our minds to be present, focused, receptive, mindfulness creates fertile ground for flow to happen and for our creative and intellectual abilities to truly flourish.
That's a really inspiring perspective. It suggests that mindfulness isn't just about inner peace, but also about reaching our full potential and achieving that optimal performance.
It is. And the connection between mindfulness and flow shows how deeply these practices can affect our lives. Not just in reducing stress and improving well-being, but also in unleashing our creativity, maximizing our productivity, and achieving mastery in whatever we choose to do.
This has been such an amazing journey. We've explored mindfulness from a scientific viewpoint, learned about the research that shows how it can reshape our brains, regulate our emotions, and deepen our self-awareness. And we've touched on the spiritual side of mindfulness too, recognizing its potential to awaken the heart, cultivate wisdom and compassion, connect us to something larger than ourselves. But as we wrap up, is there one key takeaway, one essential message that you want to leave our listeners with?
That's a great question. If I had to sum it all up in one sentence, it would be this. Mindfulness is not a luxury, it's a necessity. In today's world, our minds are constantly bombarded with distractions and demands. It leaves us feeling overwhelmed, stressed, and disconnected from ourselves and from each other.
It's like we're constantly overloaded with information and stimulation.
Exactly. And this constant mental busyness, it doesn't just hurt our well-being, it also keeps us from thinking clearly, making good decisions, and connecting with others in meaningful ways.
It's like we're losing our ability to think deeply, to connect genuinely, to simply be present.
That's a really important point. And that's why mindfulness is so important. It's an antidote to the mental fragmentation and distraction that's all around us. By training our minds to be present, focused, and aware, mindfulness allows us to take back our mental space, cultivate inner peace, and reconnect with what truly matters.
So mindfulness is a way of taking back control of our minds and our lives.
Exactly. It's a practice of liberation.
Yeah.
It frees us from being controlled by our thoughts and allows us to live with more intention, clarity, and purpose.
That's such a powerful message. It makes mindfulness seem less like something extra and more like an essential skill for navigating modern life.
It is. And the best part is that mindfulness is for everyone, regardless of your background, your beliefs, your situation. It's a simple but profound practice that can change our lives from the inside out, creating positive change that reaches far beyond ourselves.
This has been an incredible exploration. I feel a renewed sense of hope and inspiration to keep going with my own mindfulness practice and to share it with others. But before we finish this deep dive, I want to look ahead. We've talked about where mindfulness research and practice are now, but what about the future? What are some of the emerging trends, the exciting possibilities that you see coming up in the field of mindfulness?
That's a great question. The field is evolving so quickly. There are so many exciting things happening. One trend that's really promising is the integration of mindfulness into all different areas of society.
You talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
Mindfulness being used in education, healthcare, the workplace, even the criminal justice system. It seems like it's gaining traction everywhere.
It is, and that's because more and more research is showing how effective mindfulness-based interventions are for a whole range of issues, from stress and anxiety to chronic pain and addiction.
It's exciting to see mindfulness go beyond personal practice and become a more common approach to dealing with these individual and societal challenges.
It is, and as mindfulness becomes more accepted, we're going to see even more innovative ways to use it, like developing mindfulness technology, integrating it with virtual reality and artificial intelligence. We might even see mindfulness used as a tool for social justice and environmental sustainability.
Those are fascinating possibilities. It sounds like mindfulness has the potential to not just change our individual lives, but also to change the course of history.
That's a bold idea, but I think it's possible. As we develop greater awareness, compassion, and wisdom, we can create positive change that reaches far beyond ourselves.
This has been such an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation. I feel a renewed sense of purpose and motivation to continue exploring mindfulness and to share it with others. But before we conclude our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about, something to pique their curiosity and inspire further exploration. What's one intriguing question or thought-provoking idea that you would like to plant in their minds?
I'd like to leave your listeners with this. If mindfulness can really change our brains and how we experience the world, what could that mean for the future of humanity?
That's a powerful question. It makes us think about a world where mindfulness is not just something we do on our own, but a collective force for good. What if we could use the power of mindfulness to address some of the biggest problems facing humanity?
It's an exciting thought. Imagine a world where mindfulness is taught in schools, where kids learn emotional intelligence, empathy, and how to resolve conflicts peacefully from a young age.
It would be incredible to see future generations grow up with the tools to navigate life's challenges with resilience, compassion, and wisdom.
And think about the potential impact on healthcare. Mindfulness-based interventions could be a standard part of treatment for all sorts of conditions. It could reduce our reliance on medication, encourage self-care, and empower people to be more active in their own healing process.
It's a shift from just reacting to disease to focusing on proactive well-being.
Exactly. And in the workplace, mindfulness could foster more creativity, collaboration, and ethical decision-making, leading to more fulfilling work experiences and businesses that are more socially responsible.
I can imagine a world where mindfulness is part of everyday work life, creating a more mindful and compassionate culture, and maybe even extending to the world of politics. What if our leaders were trained in mindfulness, cultivating self-awareness, emotional regulation, and the ability to make decisions based on wisdom and compassion instead of reacting out of self-interest?
That's a really compelling vision. Mindfulness could help bridge divides, encourage open communication, and promote collaboration on solving problems, leading to policies that are more just and equitable, serving the well-being of all.
It's inspiring to think about how mindfulness could have a ripple effect, spreading outward from individuals to families, communities, and ultimately to the global community.
Yeah.
Expert.
It is. It's a journey that starts with each of us, but it has the potential to really change the world. And as we cultivate that awareness, the compassion, the wisdom, we become like agents of change, contributing to a more mindful, a more compassionate, interconnected world.
This deep dive has been so incredible. We've explored the world of mindfulness. We've uncovered the science behind it, its potential, the challenges, even the spiritual side of things. But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to you, our listener. What really resonated with you? What new insights did you gain? What questions are you left with? What are you curious about now?
I encourage you to really think about those questions and to keep exploring the world of mindfulness. There are so many resources out there, books, articles, courses, apps, local groups to help you on your journey.
And remember, mindfulness isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's a lifelong practice of cultivating awareness, compassion, and wisdom. And as you embark on that journey, you're not only changing your own life, you're contributing to a more mindful, more compassionate world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.